I never really liked hanging out with a bunch of other people, not even when I was young really. I was more into things like astronomy, trivia, nature, things like that. I was one of the quiet kids who were in school. No one ever picked on me or gave me a hard time or anything like that. I just mean I would always walk in the hallways and be quiet. That's just who I was. Being like that, I very often liked to go for walks in nature. It was so easy to just be alone, and the feeling of isolation from people was something I liked very much. In fact, my parents used to joke that when I grew up I would probably become a hermit or something. There was a lot of rural area around where I grew up. Most of the area I had explored at some point when I was younger. When I was 16 and had a car, I would drive to new places and explore them too. That opened up a whole new world for me because it gave me so many new places to see. It was when I was going to one of these new places that I had a very scary thing happen to me. I was driving my truck. It was a very small Isuzu that was rusted in many places. But still, I liked it. It was comfortable, and I never really felt bad about parking it on the side of the road windows down when I found somewhere to go and explore. This was such a breezy day. The wind had to be over 20 miles per hour or so. I really liked that feeling of the wind. I was driving down this dirt road with a wooden fence blocking off a large field. I wasn't very interested in that though. I wanted to find something with trees and stuff like that. I finally found this little place on a hill that I felt that I could park my truck at. I was able to get it off the road, enough off the road, but it could still be seen by anyone who was driving up or down the hill. There was no fence or anything like that on the road. In fact, there was no barrier between the road and the edge of the hill at all. There would be nothing keeping you from just falling off if you accidentally drove off the side. But that's not the way I was going. I climbed up onto the hill. It was a pretty big one, and I knew I would be having a lot of fun this day. I did see a lot of new and interesting things after all. I was so enraptured by all of the new scenery that I just completely lost track of time. I kept exploring deeper and deeper into the woods. I wasn't worried about my truck getting lost or anything since it was so old. The wind was very strong like I mentioned, and a few times as it blew through the branches of the trees, I thought I was hearing things. It can be very creepy, especially when you're all by yourself. At one point I found this small creek and decided to follow it for a while. I was really glad I did actually, because it led me to one of the most beautiful things I ever saw. I eventually came upon this rocky area that had a waterfall on the very far end of it. It wasn't that large, but the first thing I thought about it was that it was this miniature canyon. Almost like a model piece, it was really great. The walls were rocky and the creek flowed right through it, but there were ample rocks to walk on and explore. I was walking along this creek, careful to not step in it and get my feet wet, because honestly, that was something I really hated. A lot of these flat rocks that I was walking on were pretty slippery. I did see quite a few salamanders though, and I really enjoyed watching them waddle and swim around. I had been out for a long time at this point. I guess the sun had been traveling down to the horizon. It wasn't going to be dark quite yet, but I knew I wouldn't have a lot of time after exploring this little area I'd found. I would probably be going back in the dark, but that didn't bother me as I had often done it before. Plus, I had a flashlight with me. As I was exploring and the wind was howling, I heard what I thought sounded like a stressed moan coming from up ahead of me. I was put off for just a moment, as anyone would be, but I immediately dismissed the moan as something that I'd just gotten confused about with the wind. I was still walking up to the waterfall. As I got closer and closer, I heard a few more really weird sounds. It was not easy to always dismiss it as a wind, because it sounded like it was coming from an animal or something. Just that alone made me nervous as hell, but as anyone does in those sorts of situations, I kept telling myself that it was all in my head. As I got closer to the waterfall, I noticed something off to my right side. I mentioned before that the area I was walking through was rocky, like a miniature canyon. Well, as I was looking around, I noticed that there was a cave off to the right side of me. Just as I noticed it, I heard that strange moaning sound again. I felt really nervous as I began getting close to the opening of the cave. I remained on the left side of the creek though. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I was absolutely scared and nervous. I heard some more talking that sounded like words. Finally, at last, I was standing at the side of the creek across from the cave. It caught my attention a lot more than the waterfall at this point. As I peered inside, I felt a surge of shock as the form of someone or something emerged from the cave. I mean, it was obviously a person, but the strangest, most ragged-looking person I had ever seen. He was extremely pale and skinny. His beard and hair were long and tangled. His clothing was tattered, and his skin was white and cracked. The two things that caught my attention the most, though, were this crazy look in his eyes and the knife he held in his right hand. The man came out of the cave and started coming right toward me. He started crossing the creek, splashing the water hard with every step. Fortunately for me, this made it difficult for him to get across the creek very quickly. I was able to gather my bearings and realize I was in danger. It was odd. The guy was obviously after me. He was revolting looking and he had a knife on him, but the whole thing was so bizarre that at first I couldn't take my eyes off it. Finally though, it snapped in my head that I needed to get out of there. I turned and started sprinting back down the way that I had come in the miniature canyon. The first time I looked back, I saw the weirdest thing. Rather than coming all the way across the creek, he was still in the middle of it. This time though, he was running down the creek toward me. It was so strange and stood out to me because it was inefficient. That just scared me even more because it made it seem like his mental state was something I wanted nothing to do with. I could hear him yelling at me. Mostly I was able to make out that he wanted me to get the hell out of there, and I was complying. I was absolutely terrified and on autopilot. I don't think he followed me once I got away from that area. I looked back a few times and didn't see any sign of him. After a while, I stopped hurrying when I figured out that he was no longer chasing me. I got back to my truck after a few hours. I had been shaken up though. Even as I drove home, I kept expecting him to jump out of the bed of the truck and grab me or something. But that was just a normal reaction after having a scare like that, I suppose. When I got home, I told my dad about what had happened. I expected him to call me crazy or think I was lying or something. Instead, though, he just told me that I had to be extra careful with those long hikes of mine. He told me there are hermits and other sorts who live off the grid, perhaps in caves or huts or some stuff. Apparently, they're very possessive about their property, and it was possible he would have killed me if he had to. Chilling words, but I never forget them. I didn't let it stop me from hiking in the future, though. Thankfully, I never had a scary experience quite like that ever again. During the summertime when I was younger, I would always spend at least a month and a half staying out in the country with my aunt's family. My cousin was a couple of years younger than me, but we always had a lot of the same interests and got along together very well. My aunt lived in this very beautiful area out in the country. I grew up in the city, so I always enjoyed everything about going to visit them. When I was 10, I had lived with them for about a year and just completely fell in love with it. Of course, the visiting became a very regular thing. My cousin Philip and I had a lot in common, like I mentioned. He and my uncle picked me up in town at the bus drop-off. The two of us rode in the open bed of my uncle's pickup truck while my uncle and aunt were in the front. I remember this day very vividly. It was very bright outside. It was warm, sunny, and there was a pleasant breeze going too. We both had Stewart's root beer, and we pretended like they were real beers as we drove along. It was just something we did back then. The ride to the house was about an hour-long ride out in the country. I always liked it when we got into the hills and watched all the beautiful trees swaying in the breeze. I was just so excited knowing what was going to be coming up in the upcoming months. There were no houses that were really close to my aunt's house. My aunt's house was at the foot of a holler and across the road from fields that we usually used to play basketball in. The next closest house was a minimum of a 15-minute car drive, and although Philip and I did walk there one time, I can't quite recall how long it actually took us for us to make it the entire way. We did a lot of normal things back then. Played ball, explored, went to the pool in town, many things of that nature. This was in the late 80s, and they definitely were not able to have things like cable out in that area. The house was very old as well, and obviously without air conditioning. That was okay though, because we spent a lot of time outside anyway. Philip and I, one night, decided that we were going to set up a tent way back in the hollow in order to tell each other scary stories away from the safety of the house. I mean, we didn't tell my aunt and uncle that was the reason because they never really cared for that sort of thing. We had gone back to the house to have supper. We waited until it was dark though, in order to go back out to the tent. I'll never forget what it was like, simply walking in the dark far back in the hollow like that. We had one of those cheap plastic flashlights, but that can make things seem even scarier than not having a light at all, since they were so weak. Anyway, we had a good night out there for the most part, and yeah, we told some scary stories which might explain why afterward we were pretty scared and worked up. There was absolutely no light out there other than our weak flashlight. Late in the night, I have no way of knowing what time it actually was. We started to hear something. It sounded like someone or something was walking around in the area that we had put the tent out in. Philip quickly turned out the flashlight and told me to listen. I always found that odd that he seemed to think that I couldn't listen if the flashlight was on, but I guess that's not really important in the moment. Well, we did hear something. We began whispering to each other, trying to wonder about what it might be. It was obviously someone who was very large by the way they were moving about. Even though the two of us had our heads filled with scary stories already, we didn't immediately think it could be a person. Instead, we thought it was probably some type of animal. Of course, that didn't make it any less frightening. We kept listening and whispering. It seemed like whatever it was happened to be walking back and forth behind our tent. It would get to one side, stop, then slowly walk behind the tent to the other. This went on for a few moments, and the two of us began to get very scared. We kept whispering, wondering what we should do. I wanted to get out of the tent and run to the house, but Philip thought it would be better if we just pretended we weren't aware of what was going on out there. I really didn't understand that, but I guess I can get why he might think that running would get us chased. The decision was made for us in the end though. We heard this strange cackling noise, and then suddenly something started shaking the tent. I mean, it was surreal, like something straight out of a horror movie. The cackle made us think of a witch or something, and we were lucky we didn't crap ourselves right then. Despite his original fear of running, Philip and I bolted from that tent. We both ran faster than we ever had before, and probably ever will since. It was intense, running and trying to get away. You always hear about people looking back when they're running away from something they're extremely scared of. Well, neither of us did this. We didn't want to know whatever the hell it was that could laugh like that and would be hanging out in the holler waiting to scare a couple of kids. We got to the back door eventually, which was unlocked like it always was. Once we got inside, we locked it up tight. My uncle came out and asked what was going on. We explained it as best we could and pleaded with him to lock all of the doors, something they never did. Philip's dad was this big old country boy. He was 6'4" tall and a known barroom brawler type. He absolutely was not going to lock the doors. He went out in the holler with a better flashlight to check it out and see what was going on. Philip and I were terrified as we waited there for him to come back. It took quite a while, but eventually he did. We were worried about it taking so long and thought that the witch or whatever might have gotten him. He came back and told us there was nothing there though. Needless to mention, we didn't sleep back out in that tent that night. A few years later, my parents got divorced and I went to live with my mom. These were my dad's family, so we fell out of touch. I mention this because when I reflect back upon this story, I don't really look at it as Philip and I were attacked by a witch or something mystical like that. Honestly, I think that Philip's dad probably had one of his buddies come over and they tried to scare us. It would explain why he was gone for so long when he was checking the holler out, because they would have been talking and probably laughing about their practical joke. I don't know for sure. I guess I could ask. They are still alive, but honestly, I don't want to know. Funnily enough, I kinda like the ambiguity of being scared like that. The last time I went camping was over 30 years ago. It used to be one of my favorite things to do, but after what happened to me and my friend Jeff on that trip, I could never imagine going on another camping trip ever again. I'm Alvin, and yes, that really is my name. I wasn't named after the chipmunk either, so let's just get that out of the way first thing first. Jeff and I both enjoyed camping. We weren't like some people who love living off the land and knew everything about nature though. We liked having our conveniences that made it easier to live out there. We were both 22 years old when we went on this trip. We had both just graduated from college and wanted to have a bit of fun before going off to work. I was going to grad school. We always put out a camp and were very careful when tending to the fire. We also slept in separate small tents. The tents were always right beside each other though. We'd often talk through them when we were in our sleeping bags, much like we might have done if we were having a sleepover. We had been out on this trip for about 4 days or so. We didn't do a lot of hiking. Once we set up our camp, we stayed there. There was a small stream and pond that were not too far away that we fished in. We had talked for a little while until we drifted off, never really knowing who it was that fell asleep first. Being woken up from a deep sleep is very disorienting. Not only that, but I noticed that my tent flap was open. As my eyes started to focus, I saw someone that I did not know, it couldn't have been Jeff, was looking into my tent. I was going to panic and react, but he quickly showed me that he had a gun. He told me that if I didn't do what he told me to, he would not hesitate to kill me. If I just listened to him, I would live through it. I was too scared to move, and decided that I would go ahead and do as I was told. I was worried about Jeff, but I really did not want to comment on it. I didn't know what might have happened, or what might eventually happen. He made me get out of my sleeping bag and lay face down on the ground. He then tied my hands behind my back and tied my feet together. The whole time I was terrified beyond belief. I was scared to let the guy tie me up, because who knew if that was going to be the end of it. I heard him moving around our camp, going through our stuff for a while. Then after a while of doing that, he took off. He left Jeff and I there tied up, which was a real pain because we didn't know how we were going to get up. At least he hadn't hurt us in any way though. Jeff eventually managed to wrangle one of his hands free, although he bloodied it up pretty bad doing that. Fortunately, he was able to get all free and then get me all free. Not wanting to take any chances that the guy would come back though, we tried to pack what was left of our camp and get out of there. We actually didn't have a whole lot left as the guy took nearly everything with him, but we took what was left and made our way out of the forest area. We had to call and get some money wired to us so we could hire a locksmith to get a new key for our car. It was a nightmare, but at least we were still alive. I'm really thankful that I still am, but I've relived that scary experience over and over since. I've never been brave enough to go camping ever again either. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I would also like to give a special shout out to my friend Killer Orange Cat, who is also a narrator here on YouTube that reads true scary stories. He has allowed me permission to use stories submitted to him in his subreddit in my videos. So if you like these stories, please be sure to go check him out, as he is a very good narrator as well and he puts out content every week. If you guys enjoyed my narrating style and the content of this particular video, please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide to subscribe, make sure to hit that bell button and turn notifications to all if you would like to be notified of every video I post in the future, although I post a video every day when I can, so if you just come back to the channel every so often, you'll not have missed very much. If you guys would like to get in contact with me for any reason, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You will find links to all of my social media, including my Gmail, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I will try to read them as soon as possible. You can also send me a message on any of those to submit your own scary story experience for me to read in the video. If you do decide to submit a scary story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what the theme of the story is if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include proper grammar, and please include as much detail as you feel comfortable sharing, as that makes it much easier and more likely that it will end up in a video in the future. I also have 2 other channels if you like my voice, called Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour respectively, where I do weekly true crime vids and monthly documentaries on dark things that happen in history. If you like my voice, check them out. Maybe those contents will be for you. Overall though guys, I think that's pretty much it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.